My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 29 years old, and for 52 straight weeks, I sent my parents $800 every Friday. I worked 10-hour shifts repairing navigation systems and marine electronics at a shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia, while they told me they were one emergency away from losing their home. I paid because I believed them. Then, during Sunday dinner, my father announced that the family was leaving for a luxury vacation in Key West. I waited for him to mention my ticket. He never did. When I finally asked what time we were flying, my younger sister stopped smiling. My mother stared at her plate. My father leaned back and laughed. "We didn't want you there." I looked around the table, certain I had misunderstood him. He continued, "You make everything tense, Natalie. We wanted 1 week where the family could relax." The family. Apparently, I could finance it, but I couldn't belong to it. My sister was wearing a new designer bracelet. My mother had just posted pictures of resort clothes. My father had spent the entire month claiming the roof repair was more expensive than expected. Suddenly, every excuse they had given me sounded rehearsed. I didn't argue. I smiled, stood up, and carried my plate to the sink. My father mistook my silence for surrender. Before sunrise the next morning, I canceled the weekly transfer. Then I removed every authorized user from the emergency credit account in my name. I separated the family phone plan, ended the insurance payments I had been covering, and froze the card they had packed for Florida. 24 hours later, my father called me 17 times. On the 18th call, he wasn't laughing anymore. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked away from that table, tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far Natalie's story has traveled. The payments had started 13 months earlier, after my father called me during a night shift. Until then, I had believed my parents were financially stable. They owned a 3-bedroom house in Chesapeake, drove 2 late-model vehicles, and rarely admitted that anything was wrong. That night, however, my father sounded frightened. He said a storm had damaged their roof, their property tax payment was overdue, and my mother had received a medical bill that insurance refused to cover. He told me they needed temporary help. "Just until we get back on our feet," he promised. My mother came onto the phone and said they were embarrassed to ask. I could hear her crying. I had recently received a promotion at the shipyard, so I agreed to send $400 for 2 weeks. 2 weeks became a month. Then my father said the contractor had found water damage. The amount became $600. When he claimed the bank was threatening legal action, it became $800 every Friday. At first, they thanked me. My mother sent heart emojis. My father called me his responsible daughter. Soon, gratitude turned into expectation. If my transfer arrived 30 minutes late, my mother texted, "Is everything okay?" If I mentioned wanting to reduce the amount, my father reminded me that families did not abandon one another during a crisis. I postponed replacing the transmission in my aging truck. I declined a training program in Baltimore because it would have required moving expenses. I stopped meeting friends for dinner and took extra weekend shifts. Meanwhile, my parents always had a new explanation for why the crisis continued: a plumbing leak, a tax penalty, a prescription, an electrical repair, a higher insurance premium. Every problem sounded urgent, but none came with an invoice. Whenever I asked to see paperwork, my father acted offended. "You either trust us or you don't. Nee," he would say. Trust became the weapon that kept me from asking the obvious question: where was all the money going? My younger sister, Emma Brooks, was 24 and had recently decided to become a full-time lifestyle content creator. Our parents introduced her work as a promising business, although most of her videos involved expensive restaurants, beauty products, weekend trips, and advice about living without limits. I rarely watched her content because every video made me uncomfortable. She spoke as though she had built her life through discipline, yet she had never paid rent in our parents' house. She drove a white luxury SUV despite having no reliable income. When I once asked how she afforded it, my mother said a brand partnership covered the payment. I accepted that answer because I wanted to believe Emma was finally becoming independent. 3 weeks before the vacation announcement, my father called to say the roof contractor required another deposit. He sounded exhausted. I sent an additional $2,000 from my savings. The following morning, Emma posted a video titled, "Packing for the Most Exclusive Island Escape." She avoided naming the destination, and I assumed she had received another promotional invitation. In the video, my mother's new suitcase was visible behind her. When I asked about it, Emma claimed she had borrowed the suitcase for a photo shoot. My mother later said she found it on clearance. Their explanations were quick, polished, and almost identical. I ignored the warning because acknowledging it would have meant admitting that the people I trusted most might have been coordinating their lies. At Sunday dinner, my father finally announced the Key West vacation, as though it were a reward the three of them had earned. They had booked an oceanfront suite, a private fishing charter, and reservations at restaurants I could never justify paying for myself. My mother called it a necessary reset. Emma said the trip would help her secure new sponsors. Not one of them acknowledged that only days earlier they had accepted $2,000 for an imaginary roof deposit. When my father laughed and said they did not want me there, I studied their expressions. My mother looked guilty, but not surprised. Emma looked uncomfortable, but she did not defend me. That was how I knew the exclusion had not been a misunderstanding. They had discussed it. They had planned it. They had decided that my money belonged in the family while I did not. I left before dessert and drove directly to my apartment. Instead of crying, I opened my laptop. I reviewed 52 weekly transfers, additional emergency payments, and bills I had covered directly. The total was $47,600. That did not include the phone plan, car insurance, storage unit, streaming services, and emergency credit card connected to my account. I clicked through the card activity. A charge from an oceanfront resort in Key West appeared near the top of the page. Below it were payments to a luxury car dealership, a designer boutique, and a travel agency. The card had been created for genuine emergencies, with my parents listed as authorized users. They had not stolen my identity. They had done something more calculated. They had convinced me to provide permission, then used my trust against me. By midnight, I understood why the crisis never ended. My support was not keeping them afloat. It was financing the illusion that they were wealthy. I did not act impulsively. Before touching any account, I downloaded every statement, transfer confirmation, and message in which my parents described how the money would be used. I created separate folders for the roof, property taxes, medical expenses, insurance, and household emergencies. The pattern became undeniable. Each time I transferred money for a specific crisis, a similar amount was spent on something unrelated. The $1,200 supposedly needed for property taxes matched the deposit on Emma's SUV. The medical payment matched a cosmetic clinic charge posted to the emergency card. The roof deposit appeared 2 days before the Key West resort booked the family's suite. I called the credit card company first. I explained that the authorized users no longer had permission to access the account. The representative froze their cards and issued a new account number. She confirmed that any pending hotel deposit might be rejected when the resort attempted to process the remaining balance. Next, I logged into my bank and canceled the automatic $800 weekly transfer. I removed myself from the shared phone plan and scheduled the other lines to be released to their individual users. I called the insurer and removed my payment method from my parents' vehicle policy. I did not cancel their legal coverage. I simply stopped paying the premium with my bank account. I canceled the storage unit they had asked me to rent in my name, giving them the required notice period to retrieve their belongings. I removed my card from every utility and subscription account they had gradually persuaded me to cover. Finally, I emailed my father a list of the changes. The message contained no insults and no threats. It said, effective immediately, I will no longer finance household expenses, personal purchases, or travel for any member of the family. All services currently billed to me must be transferred to the person using them. Do not make further charges in my name. Then I blocked their numbers for the night and went to sleep. At 6:14 the next morning, I woke to 19 voicemails. My mother said there must have been a mistake because her phone had stopped working outside their home Wi-Fi. Emma demanded to know why her card was being declined at a salon. My father began with anger. By his eighth message, the anger had turned into panic. The resort says they need another card by 3 this afternoon, he said. Call me immediately. He did not ask whether I was hurt. He did not apologize for excluding me. His first concern was preserving the vacation. I listened to every voicemail once and saved them. At 8:30, I unblocked his number and called. He answered before the first ring finished. Fix the card, he ordered. No, I said. There was a brief silence, as though the word had arrived in a language he did not understand. He accused me of humiliating him in front of the resort staff. He said the fishing charter had already been reserved and the airline tickets were non-refundable. I reminded him that he had told me I was not part of the trip. You made that clear, I said. So your vacation is no longer my expense. My mother took the phone and began crying. She said they had already arrived at the airport and could not afford to lose the money. I asked how much of their own money they had contributed. She avoided the question. Emma then came onto the line. She claimed the trip was partly for work and said canceling the card could damage her career. I asked whether her career depended on secretly charging expenses to her sister's emergency account. She whispered, Dad said you knew. That sentence mattered. It was the first crack in their united story. My father grabbed the phone back and threatened to remove me from his will. I almost laughed. The man who needed $800 a week was threatening me with an inheritance that probably did not exist. Do what you think is right, I said. But nothing changes until I receive every invoice, every loan statement, and a complete explanation of where my money went. He called me cruel. I replied, accountability feels cruel when you have benefited from someone else having no boundaries. Then I ended the call. That afternoon, the resort canceled their oceanfront suite because the final payment failed. They could still travel, but they would have to use their own funds to book another room. Instead, they returned home. Emma posted a vague message about an unexpected family emergency. My mother told relatives that I had destroyed a once-in-a-lifetime vacation over a small misunderstanding. My father told my uncle that I was unstable and had become obsessed with controlling the family. They expected shame to bring me back. For years, it would have worked. This time, I sent my uncle the message in which my father requested $2,000 for the roof, followed by the resort charge made the next day. I did not ask him to take sides. I simply wrote, "This is the misunderstanding they are referring to." By evening, 3 relatives had contacted me privately. Each one revealed that my parents had also borrowed money from them. My father had told one aunt he needed funds for my mother's surgery. He told my grandfather that Emma was at risk of losing her educational scholarship. Neither story was true. The vacation was no longer the whole betrayal. It was merely the purchase that exposed a system of lies. 4 days later, my mother appeared at my apartment without warning. She looked exhausted and carried a folder. She said my father wanted a family meeting on Saturday. He thinks we can resolve this privately, she told me. I asked whether resolving it privately meant I would resume paying their bills while they continued telling relatives that I was unstable. She lowered her eyes. He's angry, she said, as though his anger were a natural disaster everyone else had to accommodate. I agreed to attend under 3 conditions. My Uncle Robert would be present, the conversation would be recorded, and all financial documents connected to my money would be placed on the table. My mother hesitated, then said yes. On Saturday, I arrived carrying my laptop, printed statements, and a small digital recorder. My father, Richard Brooks, sat at the head of the dining table. My mother, Diane, sat beside him. Emma was across from them, staring at her phone. Uncle Robert occupied the chair nearest the door. He had worked in commercial banking for more than 20 years, which was exactly why my father did not want him there. Richard opened the meeting by saying families should solve disagreements with compassion rather than accusations. I placed the recorder in the center of the table and asked whether everyone consented. They did. Then I asked my father to explain the roof emergency. He pushed a contractor estimate toward me. The document was 11 months old, and the estimated repair was $4,800. I had transferred more than $12,000 specifically for the roof. Uncle Robert asked for proof that any contractor had been paid. My father produced none. My mother claimed the project had been delayed. I showed a photograph Emma had posted from the driveway 3 months earlier. There was no visible storm damage, no construction material, and no repair crew. Emma said that did not prove anything. I agreed. Then I displayed the county property records showing no permit had ever been issued for structural roof work. My father's face hardened. "So now you're investigating us?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm verifying the emergencies you used to collect almost $50,000. Next came the property taxes. My father had claimed they were months behind, but the county website showed the taxes had been paid on time from an escrow account attached to their mortgage. The medical bills were equally deceptive. My mother had received treatment, but her remaining balance was less than $900, not the $11,000 they had requested over several months. When I asked where the rest had gone, she looked at Emma. Emma's face changed. For the first time, she appeared afraid, rather than annoyed. My father said every parent had the right to decide how household money was used. Uncle Robert interrupted him. "It stopped being household money when you obtained it through false statements." Richard slammed his hand on the table and accused Robert of turning his daughter against him. Robert calmly said he had not spoken to me until after the vacation was canceled. I opened the emergency account statements and highlighted the charges. Emma's SUV deposits, a photography package, designer clothing, monthly payments to a social media consulting firm, restaurant bills, a weekend in Miami, the Key West resort. Emma whispered that she had not known the money came from me. I asked who she thought was paying for everything. She said our father had told her he had received a retirement settlement. Richard cut her off, but she continued. He had encouraged her to present the family as affluent because brands preferred creators who looked successful. The SUV, travel, and clothing were supposed to be investments in her image. My mother admitted she knew some of my money supported Emma, but insisted she believed Emma's career would eventually repay everyone. "Did anyone ask me whether I wanted to invest in her career?" I asked. No one answered. My father finally abandoned the story about emergencies. He leaned forward and said, "You were earning more than you needed. Emma had an opportunity. We allocated resources where they would make the biggest difference." The coldness of the statement stunned even Emma. I asked whether that was why they excluded me from Key West. Richard said my presence would have complicated Emma's promotional content because I did not fit the image they were presenting. I wore work boots, drove an old truck, and refused to pretend their lifestyle was effortless. "You would have made the trip uncomfortable," he said. "You always ask questions." My mother began crying, but I felt strangely calm. The rejection was no longer vague. He had reduced me to a source of money and removed me from the photograph because the worker financing the fantasy did not match the fantasy itself. I asked one final question. If I had continued paying and never discovered the card charges, how long would this have lasted? My father crossed his arms. "Until the family was stable." "You mean until Emma became profitable?" I asked. He did not respond. Uncle Robert then revealed something I had not known. After speaking to other relatives, he learned that Richard had borrowed at least $32,000 from extended family using different emergency stories. He had also applied for a home equity loan and listed projected financial support from me as part of the household income explanation. My father insisted that was normal family planning. Robert said a lender might view it differently, especially if the application contained inaccurate information. Richard turned toward me. "Are you going to report your own father?" His voice was quieter now. I told him I would correct any document that used my name, income, or financial commitment without my authorization. That was not revenge. It was protection. He called me ungrateful. I reminded him that I had given him nearly $50,000. He said parents sacrificed far more than that raising a child. I looked directly at him and said, "Parenting is not a loan you collect with interest from the child you love least." The room went silent. Emma started crying. My mother begged everyone to stop. My father stood and pointed toward the door. "If you walk out now, don't come back," he said. I gathered my documents. "You already left me outside the family," I replied. "I'm simply refusing to keep paying admission." Before leaving, I handed each person a written notice stating that they had no authority to use my accounts, income, or identity for any application, contract, or purchase. 24 hours later, the home equity lender called me. My father had listed me as a committed contributor to the household. I told the truth. I had never agreed to support the loan. The application was suspended for review. That was when the financial structure my parents had built around my obedience finally began to collapse. A week after the meeting, I stayed late at the shipyard to finish testing a navigation console. While searching for a cable adapter, I opened an old red toolbox that had belonged to the technician who trained me. Inside was a scratched metal ruler, identical to the one I had received at a school engineering competition when I was 14. The sight of it pulled a memory forward with more force than any photograph. I had won first place for building a small solar-powered water pump. My teacher had urged my parents to attend the awards ceremony. My father promised he would be there. I stood on stage holding the trophy, searching the back row until the room emptied. When I returned home, the driveway was crowded with balloons because Emma had been selected for a children's dance recital. My parents had forgotten my ceremony but hired a photographer for hers. I remembered hiding the trophy in a closet because displaying it felt like begging them to care. Years later, when I earned certification in marine electronics, my mother congratulated me by asking whether the new salary meant I could help Emma purchase a better laptop. The memories did not arrive as a list of grievances. They connected like pieces of the same machine. Every achievement I made became a resource for someone else. Every display of strength became evidence that I needed less love. My family did not ignore my needs because I had none. They ignored them because I had learned to survive without asking. Emma, meanwhile, had been trained to believe attention appeared automatically, and consequences could be transferred to me. The realization complicated my anger. She had benefited from the system, but my parents had designed it. That did not excuse her choices as an adult. It simply explained why she seemed genuinely confused when the system stopped protecting her. I took the metal ruler home and placed it on my desk beside the folder containing the financial evidence. One object represented the girl who kept proving her worth. The other represented the woman who had finally stopped submitting proof to people committed to undervaluing her. That night, my mother sent an email. She wrote that the SUV payment was overdue, the lender had frozen the home equity application, and my father's credit cards were nearly exhausted. She asked me to resume sending money for 1 month while they reorganized. There was no apology in the message. There was only a smaller version of the same demand. I replied with the contact information for a nonprofit credit counseling service and a list of local employment agencies. I said I would not provide money, co-sign debt, or restore access to my accounts. She responded, "How can you be so cold?" I looked at the red ruler on my desk and understood the answer. Boundaries often look cold to people who were kept comfortable by your lack of them. Emma arrived at my apartment 2 weeks later. She was not wearing designer clothes, and the white SUV was gone. She said the dealership had repossessed it after 2 missed payments because the loan was in our father's name and he could not refinance it. She asked whether she could come inside. I allowed her in, but kept the conversation near the front door. Emma apologized for Key West. She admitted she knew I was not invited and had not objected because the trip was supposed to produce content for a possible hotel sponsorship. She claimed she did not understand how much money I had contributed. I asked whether she ever wondered why our parents, who constantly described themselves as broke, could afford her clothes, travel, and car. She said she had believed our father's story about a retirement settlement because believing it was easier than asking questions. I liked the life, she admitted. I didn't want to know what was underneath it. That was the first honest thing she had said. Emma then told me the situation had become worse. Several brands had requested proof that her Key West trip was confirmed because she had already promised promotional content. When the vacation collapsed, she told them a family medical emergency caused the cancellation. One company discovered she had used the same medical emergency explanation after canceling a previous campaign. The company terminated her contract and demanded repayment of an advance. Another sponsor paused its agreement after relatives began questioning the false hardship stories online. My father blamed Emma for failing to turn his spending into a profitable career. My mother blamed my father for borrowing from relatives. Emma blamed both of them for lying. The house had become a daily argument. She said she wanted to repair our relationship. Then she asked whether I could lend her $6,000 to repay the brand advance before the company filed a claim. I stared at her. She began crying and said the request was different because she was being honest. Honesty does not turn my money into your solution, I said. Emma insisted she would repay me once she rebuilt her platform. I told her that was the same promise our parents had used. Support us now, and someday our success will justify your sacrifice. She accused me of wanting to watch her fail. I answered, I want you to experience the consequences of decisions that always landed on me before. She said sisters were supposed to help each other. I asked where that belief had been during the vacation dinner. She had no answer. I offered a different form of help. I would review her repayment proposal, help her create a realistic budget, and introduce her to a friend who worked in entry-level marketing. I would not give her cash. Emma rejected the offer at first. She said a regular job would damage the image she had spent years building. That image is what damaged you, I replied. She left angry. 3 days later, she returned and accepted the marketing contact. That might have been the beginning of genuine change, but my father was not finished. He created a long social media post accusing me of financially abusing my elderly parents. He claimed I had promised lifelong support and withdrawn it without warning. He described himself and my mother as victims who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful daughter. He did not mention the vacation, Emma's SUV, or the false emergency claims. The post spread through our extended family and my workplace community. A coworker showed it to me during lunch. For a moment, I felt the old panic, the instinct to remain silent so the family would not look bad. Then I remembered that silence was the currency my father had always expected me to pay. I posted one response. It was brief, factual, and supported by documents with private information removed. I explained that I had voluntarily provided $800 per week for 1 year based on claims involving roof damage, taxes, and medical debt. I included the contractor estimate, the county tax record, and the resort charge. I stated that my support ended after I discovered the emergency account had funded luxury travel and personal purchases. I did not insult anyone. I concluded, refusing to finance deception is not abuse. Uncle Robert confirmed that several relatives had received conflicting emergency stories. My father deleted his post within hours, but screenshots remained. His attempt to shame me produced the opposite result. Relatives began demanding repayment plans. A cousin who worked with the local Veterans Association asked Richard to resign from a volunteer treasurer position until questions about his personal finances were resolved. The home equity lender formally denied the application after verifying that my income had been presented as ongoing support without my agreement. Because my father had relied on the loan to consolidate his credit cards, several accounts became delinquent. The boat he had quietly purchased the previous year was repossessed. My mother increased her work hours. My father was forced to sell the expensive electronics, furniture, and camera equipment used in Emma's content. Emma accepted an entry-level marketing job and moved into a shared apartment. None of these consequences came from me sabotaging them. They came from bills reaching the people who had created them. One evening, my father called from an unfamiliar number. His voice was quiet. He said they might lose the house. He asked for one final payment of $10,000. When I refused, he said, "After everything we did for you, you can watch your mother become homeless?" I told him to sell the second vehicle, meet with the credit counselor, and negotiate with the lender. He rejected every option that required surrendering status. He wanted rescue without change. "You don't need my money to survive," I said. "You need my money to avoid admitting what you did." He called me heartless. I ended the call. The next morning, Emma sent me a screenshot of a family group message. My father had written that everything would still be fine if Emma had become successful faster. Emma replied, "No. Everything would be fine if you hadn't built our lives with Natalie's money and your lies." For the first time, she defended me when there was nothing to gain. It did not erase the past, but it showed that consequences were teaching her what comfort never had. 6 months after the canceled vacation, my life looked different in ways that had nothing to do with my parents' collapse. The $800 I once sent every Friday now went into separate savings accounts. I replaced my unreliable truck. I enrolled in the Advanced Marine Systems program I had postponed. My supervisor selected me to lead a small technical team responsible for testing navigation equipment before sea trials. I also moved into a larger apartment with enough space for a workbench, something I had wanted since I was a teenager building machines in the corner of my bedroom. The first object I placed above the workbench was the scratched metal ruler from the red toolbox. It reminded me that my ability had existed long before my family decided whether it was useful to them. My parents sold their second vehicle and several luxury items. They kept the house only after entering a formal debt management plan and negotiating modified payments. My mother continued working full-time. My father found contract work in warehouse scheduling, though relatives said he still described the situation as something I had done to him. He never apologized for lying about the emergencies. He sent birthday messages that shifted between guilt and anger. I stopped responding. Forgiveness did not require renewed access. Emma's life changed more dramatically. Her online audience shrank after the sponsorship dispute, but she stayed at the marketing job. She began repaying the brand advance in monthly installments. Once every few weeks, she sent me a message without asking for money. At first, I assumed she was trying to rebuild trust quickly. I told her trust would not be restored through promises. It would be measured through consistent behavior when no reward was available. She accepted that. We were not close, but we were no longer pretending. During one conversation, Emma admitted that being the favorite had damaged her differently. Our parents had praised her so constantly that she never learned how to fail honestly. Every mistake was hidden, financed, or blamed on someone else. When the system collapsed, she had no skills for surviving embarrassment. I told her understanding the cause did not remove responsibility for the effect. She agreed. That was more accountability than I had ever received from our parents. Some relatives asked whether I felt satisfied watching my family struggle. The truth was complicated. I did not celebrate the repossessed vehicle or the canceled contracts. I celebrated the end of the lie that my suffering was necessary for their comfort. Their consequences were not trophies. They were unpaid bills, broken promises, and false stories, finally returning to the people who created them. For years, I believed being a good daughter meant enduring whatever my family demanded. I thought love was measured by how much discomfort I could absorb without complaining. I was wrong. Sacrifice given freely can be love. Sacrifice extracted through fear, guilt, and deception is exploitation. The difference is consent. Healthy families do not punish questions. They do not call boundaries betrayal. They do not exclude someone from the celebration while expecting her to finance it. Cutting off the money did not destroy my family. It exposed what was already holding the family together. Once the payments stopped, there was no respect, honesty, or loyalty beneath them. There was only dependency. I also learned that revenge does not always require humiliation. Sometimes the strongest response is to step aside and allow reality to continue without your protection. My parents did not need me to ruin them. They had built a life that could function only while I ignored my own future. The moment I stopped participating, their choices became visible. On the anniversary of the dinner where my father laughed at me, I received an email from the Key West Resort advertising a discounted vacation package. For a few seconds, I imagined booking the trip alone. Then I closed the message. I no longer needed to enter the vacation from which they had excluded me. I had built something better, a life where belonging was not purchased. That evening, I sat at my workbench assembling a small radio receiver. My phone was quiet. My savings account was growing. My future no longer depended on whether my parents approved of me. I thought about the question I had asked myself after dinner. Was I only an ATM to them? Perhaps I had been, but that was never all I was. It was simply the role they assigned me because I had not yet learned that I could refuse it. My name is Natalie Brooks. I gave my parents $800 every week for a year, and they left me off the family vacation I helped pay for. So I canceled every obligation that never should have belonged to me. 24 hours later, they begged. 6 months later, I understood that the most important thing I canceled was not a credit card, a phone plan, or a weekly transfer. I canceled the belief that love had to be earned through suffering. Would you have stopped the payments immediately, or would you have given them one final chance to tell the truth? Share your answer below. Someone reading it may be standing at the same crossroads, wondering whether choosing themselves makes them selfish. Sometimes, walking away is not abandonment. Sometimes it is the first honest step toward freedom.
We hope the fictional story gave you something to reflect on. It was made only for entertainment, education, and dramatic storytelling. We hope it reminds you that when someone repeatedly hurts you and then asks for understanding, you're allowed to ask yourself who has been understanding you. A healthy relationship should never require one person to carry all the emotional weight.